Welcome, everyone, to the December 2020 UARC meeting. We have with us the usual cast of characters. Morris, say hi, Morris.
Welcome, everybody, to the December UARC meeting. This is an exciting meeting for some of us because we're going to have what I anticipate will be an excellent presentation this evening. We have the annual elections, which we're hoping that Gordon will join us here shortly so that he can help determine the results of that. And we have a presentation of the first annual UARC Member of the Year.
Tom, remind everybody how they join UARC or renew their membership or they join the ARRL.
So the easiest way to do it, what most people do is they'll go on to the UARC webpage, and on the left-hand column there is a button that you can press. You'll see it there that says that you can join or renew your membership. As a matter of fact, I think I'm seeing it right now on the screen. If you take a look right here where the cursor is moving, it says Join UARC. This is a little bit confusing because people get here and they read how to join, and they don't know that green button right there is actually a link. You have to press that link, and then it will vector you off to this screen here that says Membership Application. And so you just fill that out. It's pretty simple. And then you drop down to the next page, and it will it'll require you to fill this out before it'll give you that option. And then you can go ahead and renew your membership. And that's the easiest way to do it. The good news there is you do not have to have PayPal in order to pay online. You can use your credit card or your debit card, even though it says pay with PayPal. If you don't want to use PayPal, you don't have to.
It's also worth mentioning that you can join or renew your ARRL membership through the club, too. You can do that by sending money on PayPal to the appropriate amount to the Utah Amateur Radio Club, uarc@xmission.com. But if you have any questions about that, Tom will help you out, right? Yeah, we hope so.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah, and UARC gets a cut of that too, so it's a convenient way to do it. I've been doing it, renewing it through the club for the past decade or so. So that's one way to do it. All right, Morris, tell us about how classy you are.
Classes are marvelous. Now, we're doing the classes online now. We've taught 3 sessions, 2 sessions of technician and 1 session of general. Unfortunately, all of the exams are now online. Whether that's unfortunate or not, but you can sign up online to take the exam at the end of the course. We will have 2 more courses, a technician course that will start on the 18th of January, and a general course that will start on the 18th is a Monday, and the 20th of January will be the general class. Each of those will run for 9 consecutive weeks. Again, the technicians on Mondays and the generals on Wednesdays. They run from 7 till 9 p.m., and there is no charge for the class. And I and one of my assistants will be there to help you learn the material.
All right. Now, you can find out about the club's HF stations. The main one is Leamington. We're getting a few details ironed out with the other one, which belongs to Glenn, WA7X. But the Leamington station for sure is open to any UARC member and who has the appropriate license to operate HF. So go to the UARC page, and over here down on the left side, roughly more than halfway down, says HF Remote. Click on that, and you'll find the information you need to request permission to use it. There's also a quick reference guide right here and a station manual. And if you go to remotehams.com, which I should be bringing up, let's see, you can download a program called RC4B. It's under downloads. And just look for W7SP, Whiskey 7 Sierra Papa, which is the call sign of the Utah Amateur Radio Club. And you will see the station there. It's at Leamington, which is about 20, 30 miles east of Delta. So it's in the middle of nowhere in central Utah, connected by remote, rather. And you do not need any special hardware to do it, just your computer. And it's recommended you use a headset with a microphone for best audio. But it's available to all club members, and we'll have more information on the other station, too, which is located in San Pete Valley near Fairview as well, and which is a similarly equipped station, uses the same radio, very slightly different arrangement, but there will be familiarity between the two for those who are already familiar with Leamington. And it's used to good effect several times a day by people who check in the nets and just generally operate. You know, some people use it for CW as well. Let's see here. Gordon, do you have any news or updates on testing sessions? And if not, reiterate what's available.
What we know is that the best chance for finding a test session right now is to use the website hamstudy.org/sessions. Also, if anyone is interested in going to Quartz Fest this year, it's going to be called Quartz Pause. It will start on the 17th of January down in Quartzsite, Arizona. And there won't be any formal programs, but just a chance for anyone who shows up to have a good party with anyone else who shows up.
With regret, I should mention the passing of former Utahn and friend of some of us here, Brent Sylvester, K7IB, I believe is his call. Talked to him a few times. If you'd ever used the note in a box or a few other things, he did some of that stuff. Gordon knew him a bit better. Gordon, would you want to say something briefly about Brent to ring the bells of the people who might have not met him but can't place him?
Yeah, Brett was originally K7YKO. Most recently, he had a 6 call and was down in the St. George area. But people might recognize him as one of the authors involved with
IRLP?
Yeah, IRLP. He was one of the authors of that software. And one time there was a map that you could bring up for the reflector in Las Vegas that showed a map of everyone who was currently connected to it. And he was the one that wrote that map. But I think his ham activity in Salt Lake area goes back far enough that probably not too many people remember it.
Talked to him on the phone a time or two when we were setting up the 7.6 IRLP node. A bit of advice and help troubleshooting and all that. Gordon, to my knowledge and everyone else's knowledge on here, we have not gotten any nominations. So is that true? And if it is, proceed.
I have not heard of any nominations. I believe that Morris said in that case, we authorized the secretary to cast a single vote for the slate as advertised.
Okay, the slate of officers and possibly to be reelected by acclamation would be Morris Farmer for president. Vice president would be Bruce Faraday. Executive vice president would be Lonnie Oakes. Secretary Tom Kamlowski. As editor, Gordon Smith. As program chairs, Robert and Mary Jelf. Assistant microvolt editor, Ricky Asper. And I'm stuck being immediate past president because that's the only elected sort of that I got elected years ago, and I'm stuck here. So anyway, any additional comments, Gordon?
Yeah, we also have treasurer is Chuck Johnson.
Of course. Oh, yes. I was reading them in the order of from a hierarchy and not the order that's on the page. Yeah, we are not forgetting you.
So now we know exactly where Chuck sits. Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I mean, he only holds all the purse strings. I should remember.
Is that how I get out of this job?
Yeah.
There we go. Right.
Your Christmas bonus is no good anymore.
Right.
I believe us, Chuck. It's not where you sit.
Right. Anyway, Tom, are you going to make us do it all again over again this next year?
Well, I'm afraid so. By acclamation, the board, we've discussed this for the last several months. In the event that there were no nominations for, and if the existing officers agreed that they would be willing to serve for one additional term, that we would put forward a nomination, and that's what I'm doing now. That the existing officers, the slate of officers that was just read, would then be reelected by acclamation, and that's the nomination on that.
Okay, and so it is done, I guess.
That's it.
Right. And just in case anybody's wondering, there are provisions in UARC's bylaws for the events where we could not hold in-person meetings and all that. And we have voted for this occasion only in 2020 to amend, to hold in abeyance those particular parts of the bylaws that require us to meet in person. We're allowed to do that, and we're loath to do that, but hey, what can we do? I mean, so anyway.
You've probably, or at least I hope by now, you have heard or read in any of the various publications of the club and in the weekly net discussions that I have decided that we would start a UARC Member of the Year award. And this is the first year of that award. And the person that has been selected to receive that award is there. UARC Member of the Year awarded to Gordon Smith, K7HFV. Gordon has been selected for this award because of his demonstrated skills in exemplifying the reasons that the FCC created the amateur service. Details are in the attached document, which I had available until you put that up. Hang on. No, that's okay. I can find it. There it is. Okay, go ahead and put it back up.
Oh, you want me to put it back
Yeah,
up?
leave it up. Well, what I would like to do is spend the next couple of minutes here reading the
basis and purpose,
the nominations that has gotten Gordon this award. Okay, what follows are excerpts from the letter of nomination, from the letters of nomination for Gordon K7HFV as the initial UARC Member of the Year. There are, first, there are lots of people who could receive the award, but I feel that Gordon Smith should receive it. He provides thousands of hours on the air talking with, coaching new hams on good operating practices, answering questions on Sunday Night Net, as well as assisting in repeated repair and dozens of other things. In a few words, he is everybody's Elmer. For the first award, he gets my vote. That was submitted by Dave Christensen, KD7UM. Okay. So, second nomination. It is my honor to nominate Gordon R. Smith, K7HFV, for the UARC Ham of the Year. Gordon has been influential in an untold number of hams spanning multiple generations as a first contact, an Elmer, and a friend. He has been an active ham from junior high to the present. Gordon's ham participation and accomplishments are too vast to list in their entirety. That said, Gordon joined the UARC board in 1963, that is 6-3, and has more than 50 years and numerous positions on the board. He currently serves as editor of the Microvolt and has done so multiple times. He also printed the Microvolt, served as vice president as well as president of UARC. Gordon has also been president of the Utah VHF Society. He is a longtime member of the Repeater Committee, making untold trips to the repeater sites, helping to maintain and advance the radio art with one of the finest broadcast coverage repeaters in the United States. Gordon has supported the Friendship Cruise, the Wasatch 100, and many other worthy events where the amateur service has provided an essential public voluntary non-commercial communication service. He is a field day fixture who operates well into the night on Morse code, CW. He has been an advocate for the art of communications by encouraging UARC to be an education-oriented club, providing meetings and publications which raise the standards of both amateur radio communications and technology. Additionally, as a volunteer examiner, he has facilitated the testing, documentation, and submission of more new and advancing hams than can possibly be counted. While there are many worthy hams, Wood could hardly find a more dedicated and iconic operator than the hairy fat villain, HFV. For those reasons, I believe that Gordon R. Smith, K7HFV, deserves to be the UARC 2020 Ham of the Year. Submitted by M. Brett Sutherland, N7KG. And the last, as the president of UARC, I created this award, at least in part with the idea of recognizing the contributions that Gordon has made, not just to the club, but to the ham community as a whole. Gordon is always one of two people that you are directed to when you have either a technical or a protocol question. Gordon never lets you think that your questions are stupid. He always makes you feel comfortable as he manages to answer questions at the level of the person asking the question, a skill that I wish I could learn. My sincere hope is that now that we've selected Gordon as the best of the best for this first award, that our members will nominate other best of the best members that we have in our club. I am indeed pleased to acknowledge Gordon as our first UARC Member of the Year award recipient. Morris Farmer, 87SR, President, UARC. Thank you, Gordon, for everything.
That's good. Oh, there you are, Gordon. Say something.
Something. Well, I'm very honored by this reward. I had no idea this was coming, but thank you to those who felt that I made a contribution. I'm not sure how well deserved that is, but I appreciate the thought very much.
Well, it is well deserved. There's probably fewer people who've put more hours of effort than you on furthering the art of radio in Utah. So, and certainly in the Salt Lake Valley area, certainly. So, anyway.
Yeah, there is one other thing that I want to add to this. That, we put out to have people give their nominations. And I was a little disappointed that we weren't getting many back. And we got 2 or 3 if you include mine. But they were all 3 for the same person. And I thought that spoke wonders. So, again, congratulations and thank you for everything that you've done over the years, Gordon.
Well, thank you.
All right. And thanks again. Now, Ron, I think we're at that point where we'll have you introduce yourself, because you know yourself better than we know you. So take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invitation tonight. As I do these presentations, I like to do presentations that are non-technical. A lot of what I do is working with hams that are new to the hobby, or people that are maybe not familiar with a particular new area in the hobby. So I hope that by the end of this presentation, it'll either be something new or that you at least enjoyed the experience. Kudos to Gordon. That's a nice award. And I'm glad to see that your club is doing that. A couple of the clubs that I belong to do that each year, and it sounds like it's a very well-deserved award. So congratulations on that. So my name is Ron Wilcox. I put a very short bio in. My QRZ.com page has quite a bit more information and pictures of my family and my station. Basically a California boy. I had some time with AT&T and then the migration to Quest. With all of the layoffs and uncertainty, massive layoffs in the management sector, I got lost my job and needed to reinvent. So I went back to school and got another degree in nursing. And I'm currently a nurse case manager with Intermountain Healthcare at Select Health, working with the Medicaid program and the doctors and patients in that area. I love the hobby of ham radio. I was appreciative of the greeting that I got when I came on with your group, and active in a lot of different areas. I haven't taught for the last year and a half, but I do teaching. I'm a VE with the Davis County testing group. My main passion is DX. I do a little bit of contesting, nothing really serious, but DX is what I enjoy the most. And I've been president and on the board of the Utah DX for the last 4 years, and serving some other various positions. I was on the committee for the convention last year and did some presentations there. So I think that's enough about me. That gives you a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from in this wonderful hobby that I enjoy so much. One thing I love is it doesn't matter where you go, whether I'm traveling to conventions or meeting this group here or something like that. If you're a ham radio operator, you're in almost like a friendship and a brotherhood that is always friendly and always welcoming, and I always appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we tried this before, so hopefully everything is going to cooperate with us here again. All right, how does that look? Does that look okay over there for some of you, Clint, some of you that are looking at this? Does that look good?
It looks fine. It's great.
Okay, so this presentation is a kind of looking at a little bit of the history of ham radio from the beginning up into the 1960s. And rather than being a technical or completely thorough, we kind of jump around and we look at a couple of high points, and then we look at some of the individuals more on the DX side that contributed and had a lot to do. Some you may have heard of, some you may not. And so I call this the some DX history. And let me see, it's not allowing me to, there we go. We'll have to do it this way. Or I call it the good, the bad, and the skilled, the path to DX. So wireless really we always associate the name of Marconi. And when he was 22 years old, 1896, he was able to communicate by spark 2 miles across the English countryside. This was quite the deal. A lot of people were very impressed with it, and it started this huge interest in wireless communication. And then he was able to go 4 miles, and then 10 miles ship to ship. This was considered extraordinary. Then 32 miles as he crossed the English Channel. And then in 1901, on December 12th, on the third attempt, he was able to transmit an S 2,000 miles from Newfoundland over to England. A lot of people did not believe this and did not think it really happened. There was quite a bit of press saying, "No, this was just made up, or it's their fancy, or they're not really being truthful with us." And now we enter with Irving Vermilya. He was an 11-year-old boy that was excited about this whole prospect of wireless communication. This is his actual QSL card that he sent in 1958 to somebody he was working. And he liked to say that he was the first licensed amateur operator in the USA in 1901. But at the time, he was 11, and he really liked the idea of being able to receive radio signals. And unlike some of the adults, he wasn't so interested in transmitting a long ways, but he thought it would be neat to be able to have just a little bit of wire and some relatively inexpensive parts, and he would be able to start receiving. So they used what was called a squeak box, or a simple, and that should be spark. Obviously, somebody didn't edit like he should have. A simple spark coil transmitter that they called a squeak box. Now, at this time, there was a reverend. His name was Reverend Tyndall. And he's not your typical clergyman, but he really enjoyed wireless, and he had followed Marconi's work, and he would actually put it into his Sunday sermons. And so the New York Times actually had an article in which he had a sermon that he called Wireless Telegraphy and Its Spiritual Similitudes. He knew that Irving was very interested in ham radio, and he happened to go to hear Marconi when he was in the United States. So he got some papers and some information for Irving, took it back to him. And Irving, he got a little bit of cash from Dad, and he bought about 150 feet of wire. And with these documents, he put up what he thought was a pretty good station. Now, he heard that Marconi was going to try some dots, the letter S, what we just mentioned a minute ago, across the pond. So his thought was, I'm going to get in on this. I'm going to have a great time. And then in his words, quote, "Here I made the biggest mistake of my life." So Irving, he invites everybody in his area, and he tells them, you are going to hear the first transmission. You're going to hear the letter S, and he has children, women crowding his home in the area. Now, it's important to kind of realize that he ended up only at that point having 12 feet of wire. So he put it up, and he listened and listened, heard nothing. And when he first walked in, the audience was saying things like, "Wow, what a bright boy you are. This is so wonderful." And about an hour and a half later, they were saying, "I don't believe there is any such thing." They started to make fun of him, and it was a very embarrassing failure. But when you're doing about 400 meters, transmitting on 400 meters and a little bit higher, 600 meters, it's a little tough to pick it up with a 12-foot wire. So he did not go very far with that. So the next thing that he starts on now is he decides that he's not going to worry about this, that he is going to set up his own little private telegraph line. And so he starts powering this with batteries in his basement. And he starts having some of his friends join on. And he has a friend of his that the two of them start to get into a little bit of a competition and going against each other. So to get more power, what he does is he sees this power main, and he taps into this thing. And he hides it from everybody in his group of 36, even his cousin, who was the city electrician in charge of it. Well, pretty soon, there's quite a few of them that are on the air. And they had something, they called them a sign, S-I-N-E, back in those days. And they would make up two-letter signs that they would use as they talked. And pretty soon, he ended up with a 5-kilowatt spark station. And his friend that he was competing with had the same thing. So think about the power here. He was pulling 53 amps from a 110-volt power line with a home-built spark gap driven by a 250-volt DC motor. And he says, I'm quoting him again, he says, I just hurried it along a little bit by putting 550 volts on it, which he said kind of mysteriously was leaking off of the trolley wire. What he had done is he had gone out where the trolley came by and attached to that and ran the power into his Radio Shack and used that. So he said that he was never really comfortable with this. He always felt kind of bad. And after a few months, he went to the mayor and he said, do you mind if I can get a little juice from the trolley? And he explained what he was doing. And the mayor said yes. Well, he was already set up, but he said that kind of made him feel a little better about taking all of that. So now they're on the air with this 5-kilowatt. They have two 5-kilowatt stations. And pretty soon, because there was no restrictions, no rules, regulations, the Brooklyn Navy Yard is starting to have him interfere with their communications. And then a company that worked with the Brooklyn Yard called United Wireless, he really began to interfere with them. And they were trying to get him to stop. So finally, Mr. Hughes, who was over this with the United Wireless, came to him and said, we're so impressed with you that we would like to offer you a job as a wireless operator in one of our ships. And Irving was like, oh, this is incredible. And they breathed a sigh of relief because the only reason they did it was to get him to quit competing with them and taking their stuff out. So that's how he got his job. Now, at this time, the Navy is being approached and being told about wireless, and they're doing some experiments and they're checking it out. But for many of the officers, they considered this to be way too radical. A lot of the senior officers in the Navy said the idea of getting orders from land was absolutely not proper in the Navy, that the ship's captain would decide how the ship was handled. And they felt that they would lose their autonomy. But finally, in 1901, as wireless was catching on all over, the Navy dropped having pigeons relay their orders and their information, and they adopted wireless. And by 1913, they had a 100-kilowatt station at Arlington. There was a presentation recently at one of the Eastern clubs, very interesting presentation on that station. But that's not our scope tonight. But anyway, just realize that for the military, the Navy was the first one to really embrace this and use it. Now, clubs. The first clubs appeared in 1909, and by 1910, there was a lot of wireless and radio clubs. And the ARRL was trying to help to smooth some things over. An example of what it was like was in Chicago. And in Chicago, they were having some real problems they had 4 different, I guess you call them clubs or sections, and people were not getting along with each other at all. In fact, there was this one time that they were going to have a Washington's birthday test and kind of like a little contest thing. And so the Central Division manager who lived in this section in Chicago, he went out and saw that his, what he called his aerial or his wire antenna had been cut down. So they hurriedly threw the thing back up. And then he said, quote, "Two of my radio friends sat out under the mast with 38 caliber cannons and chased away exactly 8 individuals. Each one had a pair of side-cutting pliers." So with this going on, something had to be done, and some really important ham radio amateurs in the Chicago area got together with the ARRL, and they came up with a plan that was called the Chicago Plan, and a cup for those that would follow it and work together called the Smith Cup. And of course, today, our clubs get along pretty good. I'm not aware of anybody that's gone out to your remote station and cut anything down. So now we're talking about ham radio operators want to cross the Atlantic. And there was this big thing about having it done, but it was going to be done all the way down to a very, very short wavelength. And that was 200 meters. And there were some companies that were going to take it on, but they just didn't feel like they could do it. So the ARRL was asked to take on the project. Now, there were articles written in some of the scientific magazines and some of the professors that said trying to do something like this on a wavelength as short as 200 meters was ridiculous, and it could not be done. Many of the manufacturers that were actually making radios at this time offered some pretty nice prizes. There was the best receiver you could buy was one of the prizes that was offered to them. So they gave it a try, and in 1921, 24 American amateurs transmitted, and there was 250 British amateurs listening to this. And zero success. Nothing was heard. Now, in the ARRL letter that came out today, they talk about this because tomorrow is I believe it's the 99th. I only have a few minutes to kind of breeze through it, but I think tomorrow is the 99th anniversary. So all of these 250 British amateurs could not hear the Americans. Some of the British blocked each other as they were trying to do things. And so at this point, the United States said, we've got to have a U.S. operator. We have got to send somebody from the U.S. over there. And they talked about it, and they decided that it would be a Paul Godley. Now, the secretary at this time was a Kenneth Warner, and he made this bet. He bet the British that a new spring hat, that a good U.S. amateur with a modern set could go to England, and he would be able to hear the U.S. amateurs straight away, and it would soon become commonplace. Well, a very, very prominent person in England took him up on the bet and also said that he would have something inscribed on it if they could do it. So it was taken and doubled on this bet. Paul Godley, he was considered pretty much to be the reception expert. And remember, all we're talking about is being able to hear it at this point. So they packed him up, put him on a ship, and they sent him to England with the very best American receiving gear that could be gotten. Once he got to England, he has a meeting with the British hams. And in the meeting, they said that this couldn't be. They talked about the reasons. They said that he would not be able to do it. And there was a lot of skepticism that Paul encountered when he was over there. He went with the chief engineer. The chief engineer said, no American ham radio will work. The island is so small that radios are close, and you can't work if you have radios close. This won't happen. The radio in British, all of the different things, was below 275 meters. At one point, he found 39 harmonics coming from one commercial station. So he decided that after finding intense harmonics, a lot of QRN, and a lot of foul weather, Paul decides, okay, that's it. I am going to go to Scotland. So they drive up to Scotland, and he finds this field that looks like it'll work. The rain's pouring down. They go off and they talk to the landowner. Now, his name is Hugh Hunter. And they start to try to talk to him about this. And Mr. Hunter, he gets all excited, and he goes, oh, yeah, you can use the field. Have at it. Once they started walking to get their gear out, the field was covered with seaweed, which made it very, very slick. They used seaweed as a fertilizer. Between the mud and the seaweed, it was very hard. The horse-drawn wagon couldn't get the supplies up. They had trouble reaching the setup location. They had to put floorboards down and raise the tent. Just as they got the tent up, it blew down. They had to put it back up again. But they finally got the tent up, and they finally got up a 1,300-foot beverage 12 feet above the ground. It was still very cold and windy. They had an oil heater, but it wasn't working very good. So if you look in the picture, you'll see that there is the oil heater underneath the table right there. And what they would do is they would hunch down, whoever was listening, they would hunch down on the floor around that heater to try to keep a little bit of warmth while they would listen for the signal. They had a visitor one time that came and said that I know a bit of American swank when I hear it, and he thought this was all a big farce that they were setting up. So they had sealed envelopes so that there would be no problems with it, and they would listen for phonetics. Now, the French made fun of him and said, oh, he was actually listening to a ship just off the shore. He was not listening from America because he was doing phonetics and he had an OAY. And so he said, and the press heard, he said, I was able to hear one able yacht. And that was his phonetics for OAY. So the French press took it up and said he was actually listening to a yacht and never did hear America. Kind of a little interesting side note to this whole thing. Now, 1921, 1:42 a.m., they have success. They hear 1 AAW. They've done it. They've crossed the Atlantic. They did it all the way down on 200 meters. And in the QST magazine, this was what was on the headline right on the cover. Oh, Mr. Printer, how many exclamation points have you got? Trot them all out, as we're going to need them badly because we got across. And incredibly, it was done on 200 meters, which they were told it was impossible to do it on anything less than 600 meters. Now, all of a sudden, we've got all kinds of things going on. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that the secretary, Kenneth Warner, he got the hat. It was hand-painted, had the Union Jack, the Stars and Stripes, and it said, from W. Burnham to Kenneth B. Warner. So he did get the hat from the bet. Now, with this, all of a sudden, we have Clifford Dow, 6ZAC. He's in Hawaii, in the territory, and he's starting to hear amateur stations in the United States. And then he overheard California talking to Wisconsin, all the way down to 375 meters. Then on April 13th, there was a trans-Pacific two-way communication. Then on April 13th and 14th, the Pacific and Atlantic coasts, for the first time ever, from California, and I think it was Connecticut, had a two-way communication. This was just, things were happening so fast. In the next 12 months, new record distances and countries talking to each other were broken almost every single week. One article in QST called it the most hectic period in the history of ham radio. They had a record of 9,000 miles, and it stood for 6 days, and it was the longest that year that a record held for DX or for long-distance communication. So QST said this: "This poor magazine has recorded so many dazzling accomplishments in recent issues that its supply of exclamation points and bold-faced type is in danger of exhaustion." And there's a picture of the magazine, and here's all these cards and everything going on with it. Now, in 1912, we're kind of jumping around a little bit here, but in 1912, there was a law, and it was called the Alexander Law. And they wanted to put the ham radio operators in an area where they wouldn't interfere, and they felt that this was an area where they wouldn't be able to do much anyway. So they got privileges below 200 meters, and they were now limited that they could only have 1 kilowatt and nothing more than that. At this time, there was a whole bunch of events now with the legislature, with Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was the Secretary of Navy and stepped in. The commercial broadcasting, we're starting to go from Spark to CW, but let's go a little bit more to the DX. Soon there was special permission they asked, and the government said, yes, you can go to 80 meters. Everybody poo-hooed this and absolutely made fun of them. There was no way that you could do anything on 80 meters. One scientist talked about if you were going shorter than 200 meters, he wrote an article in QST, and it said right at the beginning, it cannot be done to do any radio transmissions under 200 meters. Another scientist, very prominent one, said 100 meters is useless. And then, to the wonder of all, the DX ended up being on 108 to 118 meters. This absolutely threw everybody for a loop that they were doing it on these frequencies. Now they start experimenting with 40 meters, and they were having success on 40 meters. They were even talking now that instead of doing all the DX at night, they might actually be able to do some DX during daylight hours. This had not been done before. And there was a lot of theories at this time as to why. A lot of scientists said it was the moon that caused radio signals to go the distance they go. That's why the idea of doing it during the day, they said, couldn't happen. There was one that said it was all air, that radio signals would get caught in the air, and then the air would carry it around. And then the Kennelly Heaviside layer was discovered. We now know it today as the E layer. Here's a picture of Kennelly and Heaviside, two scientists that made this discovery up in the atmosphere. Now the next step is 20 meters is now authorized for experimentation. And from there on, it just took off, folks. The first QSL card was in 1916 from 3TQ. And 8UX, Carl, he was an artist and a ham radio operator. He developed this idea, and they submitted it to QST. And QST started to print articles on how these QSL cards, that's what they decided to call them, how they should be sent and what should be on them. We also began to have awards. One of the first ones was Worked All Continents in 1926. And Brandon, 60I, got the very first one. In 1934, the R9 magazine sponsored it, and in 1940, CQ magazine sponsored it. We had the DXCC started in 1935. First one was awarded in 1937. We also had something called a variable directional electric wave generating device, or for short, they called it a wave generating device, that really changed radio. It was in a paper written by 2 Japanese college professors, and they got a grant or a patent in 1932. Now, today we know it as the Yagi antenna. It was called the Yagi Uda antenna. Yagi, he was a Japanese scientist, and Uda was his colleague, and they invented this wave projector antenna. Now, let's skip back a little bit. Let's go to Russia, and we have Ernst Krenkel, call sign RAM. After World War I, he wanted to go and become an wireless operator. And he tried to do that, but after World War I, things were really tough in Russia. And in order to help support his family, he was not able to finish school and dropped out and went to work. He did this for a few years, and then when he was 18, he noticed an ad for a night class for radio operators. And he thought, wow, this is great. It's free. At that time, they were trying to find, or the military and the government was trying to get some more radio operators. So he went to this free class at night while he worked during the day. On the final exam, he had the highest CW speed of anybody in the class. However, he couldn't find any work. He wanted to travel the world, but there was nothing when he got done anywhere. So what he did, he heard of an urgent need for an Arctic expedition. He applied, and he was accepted with no experience. And mainly because nobody else wanted to go. The pay was poor. You'd be gone for 12 months, and the living conditions, as you can see in the picture, were horrible. Excuse me. But Ernst loved it. He loved it. So after that 1 year, he wanted to return, but he wanted to take ham radio equipment with him at the time. And he was told, absolutely not. There is no way. Well, this is a pretty enterprising young man. So he goes to the Russian radio laboratory, and he says, you know, you have some incredibly great gear. The Navy would sure like to test it. And they were like, really? Oh, we'd love to have the Navy test it. So they gave him some of their best up-to-date equipment, thinking the Navy was requesting him to get it from him. Ernst then goes to the Navy and he says, hey, guess what? The Russian radio laboratory gave me this gear and they want you to test it to be able to test the most up-to-date gear there is, and the Navy gets to do it. So working both sides like that, they said, sure. And so he ended up in the Arctic again and transmitted, and he was able to make contacts from there. He became very well known to the public. He started going on both blimps and ships, and he made a lot of contacts, but he also made a lot of radio contacts as well. And there is actually one of the blimps that he was on. Now, he was on a ship called, and I'll probably mispronounce this thing, I always do, but Chelyuskin is how I say it. They got hit by ice and trapped, and it started to rip up their ship. So the captain did an emergency evacuation. Ernst, however, refused to evacuate until he had received a affirmation or confirmation that his distress call and their location had been received. And then he was the last one off the ship. Because of that, he was given the honor of the call sign of the ship, which was RAM. That now became his call sign, and for the rest of his life, he was the only one that used that. There was a parade for the sailors that were able to make it off the ship, and he was prominent in it. He became the chairman of the Russian Central Radio Club. became the chairman of the Federation of Radio Sports for Russia. And there's a lot of articles and museum exhibits over there to this day that honor him. And there's a bay and an island named after him. He died in 1971, and his tombstone has R-A-E-M. All right. Let's talk about Gus Browning. Gus Browning is truly a unique individual in DXing. He was the first DXer elected to the DX Hall of Fame, and there's one elected each year. He was number one, the first one there. He was known for always having a Coca-Cola, and if you look in the picture, you will see that he has Coca-Cola in his hand. He was right-handed, but he taught himself to write with his left hand because he wanted to be able to do CW with either hand so he could write with the other hand while he was doing it. He was always even-tempered, always smiling, always happy, but he was known that when he was in a pileup, he always controlled it and kept it under control. As he would travel the world, he always said that if the natives ate it, he would try it and he would eat it. He hardly ever had money. This guy was like one person that was a very close friend described him as being as poor as a church mouse. So he would like join fishermen, caravans. If they were going in what he thought was the right direction, he would talk to them. He would offer to show them how the radio worked if they would let him go with them. And he went and traveled basically the entire world doing that. If he needed a place to stay, he would go up and say, I will let you see how this works. If you'll let me sleep in your shack, let me sleep in where you're at. He also developed a taste for yak butter when he was over in that area. And for the rest of his life, he said that he liked yak butter. There's another picture of him. Sometimes when he would arrive in a place, he wouldn't even be sure where he was. He would ask and say, where am I? And they would tell him what country or reef or island he was on. And then he would make up a call sign if he didn't have one that had been assigned. And if you look back, you'll see some very interesting call signs from him at the beginning. He operated from over 100 countries. He had a great sense of humor. One thing that he was notorious for is that he would, if the pileup was getting too big, he would all of a sudden go up 10, up 10. And then people that would be traveling with him would say he would just start laughing, and then he would never go up 10, and he'd work people up about 1 or 2. And they said he thought that was so funny that people would do it, and he would do it over and over, and they would still run up 10, and the pileup would go up there. One time he was transmitting, and all of a sudden he goes, I've got a QRT, I've got to stop now. My feet are getting really wet. I've got to get back in the boat right away. Nobody knew where he was or what was going on, but he did that. All right. Danny Wheel. 9 years he sailed his boat pretty much alone, and he covered 20,000 miles. He had 3 boats. Yasme 1, 2, and 3. Why 3, you ask? Well, 1 and 2 got sunk. So he kept getting boats and naming them the next number. He is number 5 on the CQ all-time list and CQDX Hall of Fame list. He would do anything possible to give out a country for you and to make a contact. John, K4IIF, said of him, he had more narrow escapes from death than 100 average men. And he was the pioneer of the worldwide de-expedition. And there was recently, in his honor, a group of hams that went down and put out his call sign. I worked him and got the QSL card from him. It was kind of nice. The Yasme Foundation, as you can see, named after his boat. And he would call it the Round the World Expedition. Here he was in the Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands. And there's a picture of him with his wife. So, a couple of interesting stories about Danny. He was in Nauru Island, and he wanted to put up a beam antenna. So he finds this pole that has a 2-inch diameter and is 40 feet high. He then has a beam that's 33 feet wide and 12 feet deep. Looking at that pole being 2 inches in diameter gave him a lot of misgivings. He said there was no way that it would support him and the beam. Quoting him, he says, "So, being one of the brave types, I looked around for volunteers. And as he did so, he heard a noise, and he looks, and here's one of the young native boys scurrying up this 2-inch tube, and he's actually able to get all the way to the top. So he's swaying in the breeze, and the pole is moving, and he gets the beam halfway up, and there's this high-tension wire that would have just fried this poor little kid. And he said it scared him to death, and the kid just kept pulling and got it free and got it up. And then it got stuck again, and he couldn't budge it. So all of a sudden, before he could say anything and say, okay, forget it, it's too dangerous, another young boy had shimmied up the pole and was at the top of the pole to help. He said, this really had me worried. The two of them had got to the top, but could not get the beam to set in place when they finally got it up there. I heard a call, and all of a sudden, a third boy went up the pole. This pole is now swaying precariously. And Danny said he had to close his eyes. He was so scared that they were going to get killed. All of a sudden, they started yelling, and he looked up, and there was his beam up on top of the tower, and the boys were on the ground. Another time he was in a typhoon, and all of a sudden the ship, it's hit rocks, it's smashed, it's breaking on this island, and the rudder got smashed, then the propeller was broken, and he said he could still hear his receiver going through all of this. He managed to get off the ship, he managed to get to shore and lay there in the sand, and then he said the boat was only about like 50 feet away. So he's laying here in this typhoon up on the sand in an unknown island. He survives the night. The next day is clear and nice. So he goes out to the ship, and the first thing he gets out is some food and the radios. Takes them to shore, got them fixed up, and found out what island he was on, and was able to have somebody pick him up. And there he is, gentleman, adventurer, the grand de-expeditioner, Danny Whale. This was about 1949 or 1959. Okay, last one we're going to look at tonight is Iris and Lloyd Colvin. If you were alive in the 50s and the 60s, they were so famous. They were DX, the ultimate DX. Lloyd was the epitome of absolute integrity and absolutely would help anybody in any way that he could to work DX. He was a retired military officer. He was a land developer. He made quite a bit of money as a land developer. And so when he retired quite early, and he and his wife Iris flew the world putting out DX. He was licensed at 12. His QSL cards weighed more than 2,000 pounds when he passed away. He had 1 million QSOs, which in that day was a tremendous number. He had 221 countries, and he was able to operate, got permission to operate from 2/3 of those. He was known for generosity, kindness, passion. He loved DXing. He loved it. I mean, absolutely loved it. And he was absolutely honest on everything he did. He would never fudge. When he died, his life insurance policy of $150,000, he had written in his will that life insurance policy, and his wife had said absolutely it went to the ARRL. There's the two of them. His motto was, if you don't have it, it's rare. He did not believe in the philosophy of only trying to put on things that were super rare for everybody. If he knew a ham radio operator needed it and he was going to be there, it was rare, and he put it out. He was very fast. He could easily handle 40 words a minute, but he hardly ever went over 25 words a minute when he was on the air doing contests or putting out DX. So a couple of stories about them, and then we'll wrap it up. Hopefully at least half of you are still awake. So there's this big international contest, ARRL contest. The rain is pouring down. He's excited. He's in his shack working, and all of a sudden the rotator stops working. Now, Lloyd, he has this lineman that he usually can connive to come out, and he'll pay him extra money and fix problems that he's got. But the lineman's in the hospital. So now he calls the power company. It's Friday evening. It's dark. It's pouring rain. And he convinces them that this is a true emergency. You have to get this fixed. And they're trying to figure out why it's an emergency. And then he offers to pay double time and a bonus. So sure enough, right away, there's a lineman that shows up. He climbs the pole, and he says, well, your brand new rotator has jammed gears and won't work. Lloyd says, oh, shoot. So he decides to quit, goes in the house, and then a couple hours later, 11 o'clock at night, he changes his mind. He's got to be on this contest. So he gets another lineman to come out, offers him double time and a bonus. This lineman climbs the pole, cuts the rotator loose, and attaches a rope. After he leaves, whenever Lloyd needs to turn the antenna, he runs out in the rain and the pool of water in his lawn now, grabs the rope and turns the rotator and then ties it off. A little bit later, he starts to smell smoke. So he runs out, and there is a fire up where the rotator is. And the rain, all of a sudden at this point, quits. So now he has no rain coming down, a fire on the pole. He grabs his garden hose, but the garden hose won't reach high enough. He calls the fire department. They come out. They manage to get the fire out. They leave at 3 a.m. His insurance agent has been there watching all of this and says, sorry, but this is not covered by your insurance. However, he still operates until Saturday. And Saturday, the FCC shows up and says, you're exceeding your power limits. And he shows them all the damage and that he can only operate at about 100 watts. So they say, oh, okay, well, we have to see your license. We'll get out of here and leave you alone. He grabs his license and realizes he forgot to sign it. So he asks them to look the other way, signs the license, they check it, and then he says, well, I'm disinvested, and he continues with the contest. Another time, he's in Japan, and this was while he was in the military, and the mic burned Iris's lips. So he said, okay, I got to ground it. So he looks out the hotel window, and down on the ground, he sees a pipe, water pipe or something. And so he says, I will ground it. He drops a wire down, and then it snags on the window below, and he can't get it loose. So he tells Iris, he says, I'm going to run down to that room and ask them if they'll let me go to the window. I'm going to loosen it, and then I'll run down and tie it to the pipe so you won't get burned anymore. So he goes down to the room. He knocks on the door, and here is, quoting Lloyd, he says, the door was opened by a luscious and beautiful lady, scantily dressed. He explains the situation, but she doesn't speak English. But she looks at his uniform and points at his uniform and opens the door and let him in. He said he went to the window as fast as he could, opened it, unsnagged the wire. He said, I was so embarrassed about this that I turned around and thought I was opening the door outside, and I ended up walking into a closet. So he opens the door real quick to get out of the closet, and he's face to face with a man who is the lady's husband. He said, again, quoting him, said, I did not try to explain anything to the husband, but I made a beeline out of the room. The velocity of a bullet coming out of the muzzle of a gun was slow compared to my speed exiting that room. He talks another time that he was trying to avoid expensive hotels. They were going to a South American country, and he found a private boarding house who said, sure, set up your radio, set up antennas, and they had really reasonable rates. He told Iris, and she was like, oh, this is great. So they went down to this South American country, but the first night there was all kinds of noise, and they heard loud male voices coming in and out. And he was like, what's going on? So the next morning, he went down to talk to the boarding house administration, and he didn't see any men around. It was quiet. And come to find out, he had actually booked them into a brothel. And that did not end up very well. Another time, a man stole Iris's wristwatch. Lloyd ran after him, cornered the thief, grabbed the watch, took it back to Iris, who exclaimed, Lloyd, that's not my watch. Well, these are some of my sources for this presentation. I hope I haven't bored you too much with it. Actually, I hope you've kind of enjoyed it. Again, this was just kind of a fun, quick look at some of the important people in DXing. If you are interested or want to learn anything more about it, the Utah DX Association, UDXA, give any of us a call, drop into a meeting. There are some excellent mentors in the club that will help you, and we actively pursue DXCC and go to some of the conventions together. A group of us have a lot of fun. And just like most clubs, I'm also with Davis County. It's a good, friendly club. I'm very, very big on clubs. I think every amateur radio operator should be an active member of a club. So that's all that I have at this time. I will now turn it back to whoever it is. I think it's Clint. And you've heard enough of me. I'll be quiet. And Clint, it's yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Ron. Great to hear some of those stories. A lot of characters. You made them on the air everywhere. And I personally find some of the radio history and technology history to be fascinating. And it's kind of along the lines of what's old is new again, is the amateurs as of 3 or 4 years ago got some of the bands 630 and 2200 meters that are in the frequency range that hams were using 100 years ago, and having good success. Of course, the technology allows it to work a lot better, but still, it's kind of interesting to think that just a mere century ago, those would be inhabited by spark transmitters and pulse and arc generators and all those sorts of things. Anyway, I think that concludes the end of the meeting.
No, one thing I need to mention.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I apologize. When I was talking about the classes that we'll be teaching next month, I've had not several, but a couple or 3 or 4 inquiries about teaching the extra class. And Ron Spears, K7RLS, and I have talked about this and decided that we're going to skip the 2021 season of teaching the extra class because, one, it's such a long class. It runs for 16 weeks. And 2, it doesn't lend itself really well. And we are not yet prepared to be able to teach that from a slide presentation sort of arrangement. So we will not be doing a extra class in 2021, and we will do another one in 2022. And congratulations again to Gordon, and thank you, Ron, for your presentation. I was thoroughly entertained and enlightened. Thank you for your presentation.
All right. And of course, once again, if people want to know about the classes or whatever, how do they contact you?
You want to see if I get it right this time?
Yeah, well, we can see.
My call sign, AD7SR @ARRL.net. Please send me an email. That is the only reliable way of contacting me. You can try my phone, but if I don't recognize your phone number, we don't answer the phone, and we are horrible. I mean, horrible is a compliment on how often we listen to our messages. We have had messages as old as 3 and 4 months old that have gone unlistened to. So don't bother calling our home phone and leaving a message unless it's just to entertain yourself. So 87SR @ARRL.net.
All right. I'll put that up as a graphic when we have the Memorex version of the show. Anyway, to catch up on the comments on the YouTube chat, Don Ledwith, Laird Severinson, Paul Plack, Gary Crum, and Glenn Worthington all congratulate Gordon on his award and say it's very well deserved. And I would second that, of course. And Glenn also chimes in that he actually met Iris and Lloyd years ago at Dayton, and they said they were great folks. And I imagine they would have been to Dayton a lot more often than I have been.
Oh, cool.
And also, what's the, before we forget, what is the topic next month, Morris, for the meeting? January.
You're asking me?
Well,
I can remember what I had for breakfast this morning. Well, but that's only because I have it every morning.
Well, according to Gary Krem, KK7DV, next meeting in January will be Max NG7M on the topic of CW contest operation using the UARC Leamington HF remote or other remotes. And with that, we will, unless there's other business, we will conclude the December 2020 UARC meeting. I have a very happy holidays, Merry Christmas and all that. Be safe, and we hope to see all of you next year. 7-3.